Good afternoon. My name is Betsy Carr, Senior Marketing Manager at PurePort, and I want to welcome you all to today's webinar titled, Why Can't My Network Be More Cloud-like? First, I would like to introduce today's speaker and cover a few housekeeping items. Today's webinar will be presented by Gary McAuliffe, Vice President of Strategic Partnerships at PurePort, and Johnson Coffin, Vice President of Solutions Engineering for PurePort. All attendees' lines are muted and the call is being recorded. At the end of today's webinar, we will have a live Q&A session using the question feature located on your GoToWebinar panel. Also, as a reminder, all those who attend today's webinar will get a Yeti Collegiate Tumbler. Stay tuned for an email tomorrow to order your tumbler and we will ship it directly to you. And at this time, I'd like to go ahead and turn the call over to Gary.
Thank you, Betsy, and thank you all for attending today. I noticed on the attendee list that there were some old friends, some current partners and customers, and some companies that look like maybe their first exposure to PurePort. So we're really thankful that you're all here with us today. I'm Gary McAuliffe, and I do manage our strategic partnerships at PurePort, which includes our relationships with our hyperscale cloud providers, carriers, data centers, solution integrators, and a few ecosystem partners. I'm joined by Johnson Coffin, who is our head of solution engineering. Johnson and his team help our customers manage and deploy their networks, as well as support them once they get into a production state. So again, thank you all for coming today. Johnson and I have had a chance to work together a couple of times over the last 10 years, and we are super excited to partner once again at PurePort and partner on today's webinar. We've got a few goals for the webinar today. One, we're going to explore how the cloud is dramatically accelerating business. And that bullet point should probably be followed by a duh, because we all know that that's so true in today's business world. We'll also talk about why networking and telecom has not kept up the pace. And we'll introduce you to how PurePort can accelerate your cloud and network journey via our platform. This slide is one of many we could have used to start off the webinar, but it is obviously dictating a common thing, which is that the cloud is dramatically accelerating business process. This particular slide comes from Bessemer Venture Partners and their annual State of the Cloud report. If you haven't seen it before, it's a really great resource for things that are happening in the cloud. But it really speaks to the acceleration that the cloud has enabled for a variety of new businesses. It highlights that this day and time, businesses are literally scaling from their infancy to over $100 million in annual recurring revenue in just a few years. We all know this acceleration is happening, but there are several reasons for that, and a lot of them are associated with the IT functions that the cloud has sped up. Johnson and I worked together about 10 years ago in a data center company, and at the time, if you thought about one of our customers that wanted to deploy a new server in one of our data centers, they would go through the process of ordering, shipping, racking and stacking, and building onto that server. That process could take 4 to 6 weeks just to get a new server established for a particular project. Today, that exact same process can take less than 10 minutes in a public cloud. Also, the same thing holds true for data storage. Before Johnson and I worked together, I worked for a data storage company. At the time, we were quoting 12 to 14 weeks for a delivery of a storage platform. And even for customers like enterprises that had already pre-built their storage environments, just the process of getting approval, enabling new LUNs, connecting to that storage infrastructure, that process alone could still take 4 to 6 weeks. And again, the public cloud can enable that process in less than 10 minutes. Think about code deployment. Back in 2006, which is kind of the beginning of the pre-cloud era, customers were typically using waterfall development strategies and launching new code maybe 2 to 4 times a year as part of that process. Today, enabled by agile development techniques, DevOps tools, and the cloud, there are customers that are literally launching 20 to 30 code releases a day into their cloud infrastructure. And then finally, let's look at network provisioning. At the time Johnson and I worked together, a customer could provision a circuit from their location to our data center, and the time elapsed to go through that process could take anywhere between 60 and 90 days. Today, that same process can still take up to 60 days as part of that scenario. And how do we know that? We actually have to go through that to some extent. Everything we'll talk about today around PurePort talks about our software-enabled platform, but part of that is our enablement and partnership with infrastructure provided by traditional telecom carriers. Last year, we did a process in which we worked with 2 Tier 1 carriers to launch connectivity between several of our cloud POPs. That process from start, and by start I mean the day that we requested that infrastructure, to final installation was almost 70 days, significantly slower than the other elements of IT that the cloud has sped up. Now, why is that the case? Well, candidly, in defense of our carrier partners and defense of the folks in that industry, there's significant technical debt associated with a lot of this network infrastructure. First of all, things are very hardware dependent. So our carriers are responsible and kind of tied to limitations imposed by their hardware scenarios. Also, often the results of their networks are part of significant mergers and acquisitions. So not only are they dependent on hardware, but dependent on potentially hardware from different manufacturers in different locations and different eras of their network. It can really be a significantly huge issue. What this has done is it's enabled their process for provisioning circuits to be much more manual and require much more physical steps in that process, including really some sneaker net involvement to be able to get a circuit provisioned from customer location to a data center and or the cloud. A lot of times for the customer, what that means is not only does it mean slower time to market, it also means the extent or the expansion of contract terms that have very little flexibility. So the idea that a customer may be bound to a 3-year contract on a particular circuit is a real challenge for the agility that has now been enabled by the cloud. What's the alternative? The alternative is more of a modern network architecture. And a modern network architecture starts with software. Everything is software defined, and it enables the end customer to be much more self-service oriented. They have the ability to actually build and manage their networks via their own capabilities. The customer or the infrastructure is more hardware agnostic. It allows the ability to use more white box compute and network resources, very similar to the type of network infrastructure that is deployed by the major internet providers and carriers. It's driven by APIs. So everything is written from a software perspective so that these networks are now programmable and that customers can interface with their network and actually change their network via a software interface. And finally, for the end customer, it allows much more of a consumption-based model. The idea that that customer can now spin up and spin down resources at a moment's notice based on their business demands totally changes the complexity of a particular network environment. So where does PurePort fit into all this? We call our product the Multicloud Fabric, and our goal is to seamlessly, and by seamlessly I mean immediately, orchestrate private connectivity to the top cloud providers. Everything is software defined, enabling private connectivity all at layer 3. So what we do is we abstract some of the complexities of routing and BGP from the end customer so that they can build and manage their own networks in a much easier way than has traditionally been available through their provider. Modular architecture throughout so that we can continue to add various network functions to the platform to enable the customer to get new benefits and to achieve new goals. Everything is cloud native. We enable connectivity through the native private connections of each of the cloud providers like AWS's Direct Connect, Azure ExpressRoute, and Google Cloud Interconnect. Generally speaking, most customers reach their cloud resources over the public internet, but each of the major cloud service providers provides what you might think of as a private backdoor into those resources. PurePort enables that through software-defined network, the ability to spin up connections on those private circuits almost immediately, as we'll show you in our demo today. In addition to the access to the clouds, the PurePort Multicloud Fabric also enables connectivity in a variety of methods to the end customer premises, whether it be IPsec VPN connectivity, or physical port connectivity connecting over 120 PurePort enabled POPs in the US. Customers can turn up these resources in minutes, as we'll show you in the demo, and bandwidth can be adjusted at any time. So as a customer starts their cloud migration, they can build a much larger circuit, and as they go into more of a steady state mode, they can reduce the size of their network. We enable the secret sauce in this solution a lot from what we call our distributed multi-cloud router. Again, software enabled. It's a network function virtualization that is literally contained in containers, software containers, and are able to route and build virtual routers throughout the network. Everything is fully distributed to the edge of the network. So instead of having to pick where your routing infrastructure is, every single connection that connects to the PurePort fabric is enabled by 2 virtual routers as part of that redundancy. We're able to add functionality on top of the network, things like our cloud-grade NAT, that allows us to add modular software components to the benefit of customers. What we found is as customers started to roll out our network to multiple sites and multiple clouds, inevitably they found issues with IP conflicts. So we built software into our platform that allows a customer to just point and click to identify an IP conflict issue and resolve it on the fly. Everything we do in the network is fully meshed, which means we're reducing the elements of choke points and particularly the hairpinning that typically happens through a corporate data center or corporate network. And all of this enables this idea of what we call intent-based networking. Instead of complex routing decisions, spreadsheets, and other tools, a customer just picks what clouds they want to connect and what sites they want to connect, and the platform takes a lot of the complexity away from it, and the customer is not required to have significant experience in network management. In our demo today, we're going to show you what's called the PurePort Console, and we believe this is a great innovation in what's happening in the network space because it gives the customer self-service control to build, deploy, and manage a variety of cloud and location-based networks. The customer can literally point and click their way to building out their network infrastructure without interaction to their service provider or otherwise. But we also know that in this world today, folks want to go beyond just a user interface. So everything you see in our user interface today is driven first by our API. Our full REST API is available to all of our customers to build out integrations from tool sets they already have. Additionally, we've also pre-built integrations to a lot of what you might think of as DevOps tools like Terraform and Ansible. So as customers are starting to build out their automation or automate their infrastructure in the cloud, they can now also do that with their network, which is a unique capability not yet available in the market. Let's talk a little bit about use cases. Obviously, cloud to cloud is becoming a much bigger play every day. In the early days of the cloud, most customers picked one cloud provider. What we're starting to see, though, is customers that want to leverage functions and features between clouds, and we're seeing a much bigger uptake on customers that are using one or more clouds as part of that process. The nice thing about our platform is we can privately connect 2 clouds in a matter of minutes, which Johnson will show you in the demo. And we also have the ability to do that without the customer having to deploy any infrastructure or build any circuits as part of that process. They just use our platform to privately connect the 2 clouds. We also believe significantly in this idea of hybrid cloud, where customers in their cloud journey are starting to move certain workloads to the cloud, but still maintain efforts in their data center. As I mentioned earlier, we're now enabled into about 120 of the largest data centers in the US, and through partnerships with other carriers and data centers, we expect that number to grow not only domestically, but internationally, over 1,000 data centers into sometime in the next year. Finally, the last movement you've seen in the networking space is this idea of MPLS replacement, or the ability to connect multiple sites. We feel like we've established a great space in the market in that we, in some respects, act like an on-ramp to the cloud, but we also can help in the MPLS replacement in efforts around SD-WAN and otherwise. I'm going to conclude with a case study, and then I'll pass the torch over to Johnson to show you a quick demo of our solution. Customer is called Find Technologies. They are a healthcare SaaS provider. They happen to have a multi-tenant SaaS application in one of the public cloud providers. And they needed to connect not only to that infrastructure, but also to connect to the private networks of many of their hospital partners as part of that process. The PurePort platform enabled them to quickly connect to those customer locations, but it added a special benefit to a problem that they were having. As I talked earlier, our cloud-grade NAT enables us the ability to deal with and resolve IP conflict issues. As Find was starting to add new customers to their network and getting those customers integrated to their cloud environment, inevitably each new customer would have an IP overlap from a previous customer. Our solution in our cloud-grade NAT allowed them to deal with that and basically bring on new customers, allowing the PurePort platform to automate the NATing process and solve that problem for them, again, allowing them to connect their customers on a much quicker basis. So at this point, I'm going to pass it over to Johnson, and he's going to do a quick demo of the PurePort multi-cloud fabric to give you a sense of how quickly and how cloud-like we can enable cloud connectivity as well as connectivity to customer sites.
Thanks, Gary. Appreciate that. So before I get started, just wanted to describe what I'm about to build. So the first thing you guys will see me do is to create a new network. You can think of a network as a container for a private group of connections. Those could be connections to clouds, connections to site via VPN, or via private port. So once I've created that network, I'll go ahead and add, first I'll add a couple of connections, one to AWS and the other one to customer premises, to kind of simulate what we typically see for maybe a data migration project. And once that's complete, I'll show how easy it is to add an additional cloud to the mix and enable customers to set up a fully meshed private WAN between their AWS, Azure, and on-premises workloads. What you see on my screen is our self-service console. So this console provides a graphical interface that our customers can use to interact with our platform. So what I'm showing here is really what the customer experience of building a network on a PurePort platform looks like. However, as Gary mentioned, we are API first, meaning that everything I do in the console today can be done via the customer-facing API directly or using Ansible and Terraform for a more DevOps-focused experience, versus performing a more manual build-out. So I'll go ahead and create that network, give it a quick name. And in the background, what's happening now is that our platform is preparing that network along with the control plane for that network. And then what appears on my screen there is our 5 core locations. Those align to the major domestic cloud peering locations and support both cloud on-ramp connectivity and the VPN gateway connectivity for those customers looking to connect from premises to our platform via VPN. The gray lines represent our private backbone, which provides connectivity between those locations for customers who use multiple of our different sites. In addition, we've got about 120 plus locations where we could deploy physical port connectivity. I doubt I'll have time to get into that during the demo, but just be aware that it is available. So next, I'm going to add an AWS Direct Connect to my PurePort network, and I will choose the US West region there in North California, map that to the PurePort Silicon Valley location. I'll choose private peering to connect into an AWS virtual private cloud, but be aware that we also support public peering for customers looking to get private connectivity into S3 and some of the other PaaS features that are available within AWS. For those of you who might be familiar with that public peering, by the way, it can be pretty complex. It requires that you bring your own public IP addresses. It requires that you do all this BGP filtering. We really make that super simple. We abstract all that out. We provide, the public IP addresses, and we make it just a click for the customer to choose the services they want to connect to. Again, for the purposes of this demo, we're connecting to a virtual private cloud. I'm going to choose a speed for that connection. So we build based on a per connection basis and based on the speed of each of those connections. Next, I'm going to need to grab my AWS Account ID. So I'll jump over to the AWS console, copy that to the clipboard. On the way back, I want to stop off in my account and show you that I do have a couple of Direct Connect circuits already in place out of the East Coast. That's for a permanent lab that I maintain. And then back to the PurePort console, I'll paste in that account ID. And we will go with the defaults for the rest of that connection. And what's happening in the background now is we're making a call to the AWS API. And within a couple of moments here, you'll see those two new Direct Connects pop up on my screen. There they are on the West Coast. From here, the customer would go into each of these, click the Accept button, and then use the information that we're providing back here in the PurePort console with copy and paste functionality to complete the BGP Keyring. You'll notice I didn't have to come up with any IP addresses. I didn't have to come up with any ASNs. I didn't even have to come up with my own BGP password. We're really trying to abstract this, all of this complexity for the customer and make it as intent-based as we possibly can. So the next thing that's happening is we're deploying a pair of those routing gateways that Gary mentioned. Those are being deployed on our hardware in a full HA configuration. The gateways are being deployed across redundant compute nodes, and the network is being spun up across discrete network circuits between us and AWS. Each of those routers is pre-configured, again, with all those network primitives. Customers not having to manage the router, customers not having to do any of the heavy lifting network-wise. So while those are coming up, I'll go ahead and spin up a connection back to customer premises. So we'll click Add Connection. For the purposes of this demo, we'll use a VPN to connect into the PurePort platform, but again, be aware that if a customer wanted to order a circuit, they could do that. They can spin up the VPN while they're waiting for the circuit to be delivered, which we've had a number of folks do, and a lot of them end up just sticking with the VPN, to be quite honest, but we do support both. So again, I've chosen the Silicon Valley PurePort location. Again, I'll choose a speed for that circuit. The customer does need to supply the outside IP address from their router or firewall. We support several different routing topologies. Don't want to get into the technical weeds here. The idea is we go all the way back to policy-based VPNs for customers with older gear that maybe that's all it supports. Last thing we want to do is make the customer rip and replace their existing network, network investment. In this case, I chose BGP for the routing methodology, so I'm going to pop in a BGP ASN. We'll jump over to defining a network. Gary talked about the NAT, the cloud-grade NAT functionality that we've built into our platform. And that was really based off the demand of a couple of our early customers. You guys, probably know this. It can be pretty complicated to manage NAT configuration at customer prem across a whole bunch of different devices. And in the case of the Find case study that Gary talked about, it's their customers. And so trying to get those customers to manage and deal with all this NAT configuration was just a non-starter and a major block towards them closing business. So for our customers, it's not complicated. It's a checkbox. And there can be a little bit more to it than that if you need bidirectional NATing, but honestly, it doesn't get a whole lot more complex than that. Again, don't want to dig too much into the weeds here on the security, but just be aware we support IGV1A and V2. Pretty long list of different security transform sets. Again, the idea there is that we want to be as cross-platform capable so that customers, no matter what they've got on-prem, can connect to us via IPsec. Last thing I'll do is go ahead and click Add Connection. I could have changed that name to something more custom had I wished to. If it were a production network, I probably would have done that. And again, in the background, we're deploying a pair of routing gateways. These also happen to have VPN capability built in. We're assigning public IP addresses for the peering. On the outside of those gateways, you can see the secondary one is pending assignment. And within just a couple of minutes, the customer's got all the information that they need right here in order to configure their on-prem firewall or router to connect to the PurePort platform over that IPsec tunnel. And once that's complete, customers get end-to-end connectivity between customer prem environment and into their AWS environment via Direct Connect, can start using it immediately. Contrast that with ordering a circuit, waiting 30 days, 60 days, or like we did, almost 70 days for that to be deployed in one case. Suffice it to say, that's a pretty quick way to get into the cloud over private connectivity. So let's say the customer now wants to go ahead and add another cloud to the mix. Let's say they want to use Azure, maybe to take advantage of the superior SQL capabilities that Azure has, maybe to take advantage of some other best-of-breed functionality, or maybe just to diversify their cloud providers. What we're going to do is go ahead and add another connection out on the west coast here in Northern California, and connect to that over ExpressRoute. Again, we'll choose the PurePort Silicon Valley location. Again, we'll do private peering to connect into an Azure VNet, but be aware we do support Microsoft peering as well if the customer wants to connect to Azure Storage, connect into some of the more advanced PaaS features that are offered within Azure. And again, we make it super simple by bringing the public IP addresses, standing up all of that peering on the customer's behalf so that they're not having to figure all that stuff out. Again, we'll choose a speed. Azure works a little bit differently than AWS. In this case, I've pre-created the ExpressRoute circuit on the Azure side. Takes 3 or 4 minutes, not very long, but typically not something we want to wait for in a demo. So I've gone ahead and pre-created that. I'm going to copy the service key to the clipboard. You'll notice, by the way, the provider status is not provisioned. Jump back over to the PurePort side. Paste in that service key, and again, we're going to jump over the rest of the options and just go ahead and click Add Connection. So again, what's happening in the background, we're spinning up a pair of routing gateways. So each connection's got its own routers, and those routers are added to the network in a full mesh topology. So you've got 3 different connections that are all peered there in Silicon Valley. But if you think about what happens as you start to expand geographically, having that full mesh is super important so that you're not hairpinning all your data through a single location and kind of defeating the purpose of using this private connectivity in the first place by adding unnecessary latency. And typically what we see, by the way, is for 2 clouds in a single region, we're between 1 and 2 milliseconds between those clouds. And it's extremely consistent latency as well, unlike potentially peering across the public-facing ports of those cloud providers. So we've made a call out to the Azure API. We're spinning up those two routers. On the Azure side, you'll see that circuit is still in not provisioned status. It's usually about 45 seconds total. So you should see that guy flip over here momentarily over from not provisioned to provisioned. And then from there, and there it just flipped over to provisioned. So from there, I would jump in, finish out the peering. Again, there are 5 fields here that I need. The data for those 5 fields are provided right here in the PurePort Console in the same order that they appear in the Azure console. And again, we've gone even as far as generating that BGP password on the customer's behalf. Once they complete that and save it, it's a couple of minutes for that period to come up and be fully established. And at that point, what I've got is a full mesh network between customer prem, Azure, and AWS. And as long as I've got the security settings in each of those environments set up the way that I want them, I've got full capability to transfer data at will between each of those, without having to need to order circuits, without having to wait for them to be delivered, and so forth. One last quick thing I want to show everybody, and again, this is where we feel like we're really making the network much more cloud-like. Is let's say I've decided, okay, I did this stuff at 50 megs. It's not enough. I need to bump it up to 500 megs for a period of time, and then I can bump it back down once I'm done with my data transfer. For the VPN, it literally is as simple as coming in, making a change to that speed, and clicking save. That policy is applied immediately with no disruption to network traffic, and I'm now running at 500 megabits per second. And for as long as I want to run the VPN at that speed, we'll pay the higher rate for that higher speed. And when I'm done with it, I go back in, crank it back down to 50 or 100 or whatever I decide, and then go back to the lower rate. On the cloud side, the cloud providers themselves don't all allow speed changes, and those that do don't necessarily let you go down, they only let you go up. But with PurePort, we enable our customers to easily stand up a new lower speed or higher speed connection and then immediately turn around and delete the old one in order to get around the limitations. Versus being locked into an unneeded circuit capacity for months or longer while we wait for a change order. So to recap, in a legacy world, the simple change would have meant reaching out to my sales rep, requesting a quote, waiting for a maintenance window, potentially having a service interruption. With PurePort, it can be done in real time and scaled up or down at will, just like the cloud. So with that, Betsy, I want to hand it back over to you and be cognizant of everybody's time. I know we've probably got some questions coming in by this point.
Great, thank you. We will go ahead and start the Q&A portion of today's webinar. To ask a question, type your question in to me directly using the questions portion of your GoToWebinar panel. We'll pause while we take our questions. Our first question is, how does your platform compare to SD-WAN?
Yeah, that's a great question. As you can probably tell through the presentation, there are some elements that look maybe as an alternative to SD-WAN. We believe we've kind of functioned in this solution kind of in between the idea of a cloud on-ramp and an SD-WAN solution. So while you have the ability to deploy our solution in an SD-WAN-like way to a lot of remote sites, et cetera, we're also working with a lot of carriers and SD-WAN providers to actually integrate the PurePort platform into their environment as part of the way that they connect to the cloud. I don't know if you want to explain, Johnson, why that's a big issue. But.
Yeah, so we definitely see ourselves as very much complementary to somebody who's got an SD-WAN solution already deployed. Most of those, if not all of them, can connect to an IPsec connection as we provide, as well as do kind of that traffic engineering over either over the internet or over an IPsec connection or over private connectivity should they choose to go that route. But the other really big difference between what we're doing and what most of the SD-WAN guys are doing is that we're offering that backdoor connectivity through the native private connectivity options that the cloud providers bring to the table. Most of the SD-WAN guys either let you just get there over the internet, or some of them get you close to a gateway that's close to the front end. But being able to take advantage of the lower cost and more consistent network performance of a Direct Connect, an ExpressRoute, or a Google Cloud Interconnect is really huge for a lot of our customers versus coming in over the front end over a VPN. The other thing that we do that's very different from what you get when you provision using an SD-WAN provider is that typically you're having to deploy a virtual appliance into your cloud environment to terminate that connectivity from prem. And with our solution, we're taking advantage of those native routing constructs within each of the cloud providers. Greatly simplifies deployment.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, are you seeing customers leveraging multiple clouds? How and why are they doing it?
Yeah, we're actually, it's funny, we as we launched the platform this year, we've seen a significant uptick in customers talking about multi-cloud environments. And I think, generally speaking, we're seeing a few categories of how or why they're wanting to do it. One that's been obvious is a customer that may have picked an incumbent cloud provider, but sees a functionality at a different cloud provider that they want to take advantage of. So maybe some machine learning capability or some other function, and they want to just be able to communicate between the two clouds. In traditional methods, that was a pretty expensive endeavor because you had the egress bandwidth cost between the cloud providers. By leveraging the private connectivity options, you greatly reduce that cost and make it a much easier path. We're also seeing some situations where cloud providers have some licensing benefit tied to their cloud enablement. So a customer may be in one cloud but are leveraging licensing economic benefits in another cloud, and they want to be able to connect those two locations. As Johnson mentioned earlier, with 1 to 2 milliseconds of transfer between clouds, or of latency between clouds, we literally have the ability to build applications and databases next to each other and maybe in separate clouds. And I guess the third one would be the third one. I guess the other thing we're seeing is just some general requirements for not having all of your eggs in one basket. And I think we're starting to see that as part of the process. So those are kind of the general use cases we've seen, I'd say, so far. I don't think it's kind of fully taken off, and we anticipate that the back half of 2019 and into early 2020 is where you really start to see that move, particularly with some of the efforts around container-based and the ability to move Kubernetes containers between clouds. I think you'll see a lot of change in that space over the coming months and weeks.
Great, thank you. Just as a reminder, if you have a question, please go ahead and type it into the question portion of your panel. Our next question is, are you expanding internationally?
Gary?
I'll take it. Yeah, no, as you saw from the demo, we launched in 5 domestic, what you would think of as cloud on-ramp locations. We anticipate growing that component more this year. We also anticipate launching cloud on-ramps in both Europe and Asia Pacific at the back half of 2019. So we'll start to look at some of the big cloud and internet-enabled kind of larger markets in both Europe and Asia Pacific later this year. In addition to those cloud on-ramps, what you might think of as the PurePort core locations, we're also working and partnering with other carriers and data centers to bring on more of those locations into our environment as part of that process. So we see that piece of it growing, and I think you'll see a pretty significant growth internationally as we continue to go forward.
Great, thank you.
Do we have any more come in, Betsy?
Yes, we do have one more question. Can you speak to security measures that are in place with regards to client keys, et cetera, that are stored within the platform?
So really the only thing that we're storing within the platform are going to be things like API keys, and those are, we're following, number one, AWS best practices for anything that's running there. But with respect to those keys, again, we're following pure best practices. So you can generate an API key on the fly, assign it a role. So we've got fairly granular role-based access controls that we didn't dig into. But when that API key is generated, it generates a private key paired with it, and that is shown once. And the only way, well, there is no way to get it back after that. We can't get it back. Everything is encrypted on the back end.
Great. Well, I think that's all. Great. Well, listen, I wanted to thank everyone for their attendance today and their involvement. We really appreciate it. We're excited to continue to help customers turn their network into more of a cloud-like structure. We did record the webinar today. We'll send you a link. Please feel free to pass it on to your colleagues that may have an interest in speeding up their engagement with the cloud. We're glad at any time to schedule a private webinar or private demos like we did today, so feel free to reach out. And as Betsy mentioned, we'll be in touch tomorrow to check in with you about the Yeti collegiate tumbler choice. I'm sure you're all going to pick the Florida State Seminoles as your choice, but if for some reason you want somebody else, we'll be glad to make that happen as well. Listen, thanks everyone for your time. Hope it's getting cooler where you are, and we look forward to talking with you real soon.